I was 8 years old when it happened, when I learned that fear wasn't just something you imagined, but something that could reach out and grab you, hold you in its cold grip, and never let go. We moved a lot when I was young. It was always just me, my mom, and my little brother, Ross. I never knew my dad, and our lives were always a little chaotic, but Mom made the best of it. When we moved into that old, creaky house, I was happy for once. A real house with a yard and a swing set. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, but it was ours. For the first few weeks, it felt like a new beginning. Ross and I shared a room, but that didn't bother me. Mom had even managed to get bunk beds, and I claimed the top bunk immediately. For a while, things felt normal. And then Ross met Zoe. It started one afternoon when I was walking into our room and found Ross sitting on the floor, chatting away. He was 4, so I figured he was just playing pretend. I asked him who he was talking to. He responded Zoe without even looking up. I rolled my eyes and let it go. Kids had imaginary friends all the time, right? But a few nights later, I woke up to a soft whispering sound. Groggy, I leaned over the edge of the top bunk and looked down. Ross was sitting cross-legged on the floor, whispering to someone or something I couldn't see. I asked him what he was doing. He looked up at me, a serious and matter-of-fact expression on his face. He said he was talking to Zoe. I glanced around the room, my skin prickling. I told him to stop being stupid and go to bed, that there was no one here. Ross was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "She's mad at you." There was no emotion in his words. Before I could respond, I felt a hard kick against my mattress. Startled, I sat up, ready to yell at Ross, but he hadn't moved. He was still sitting on the floor, staring up at me. I told Ross to stop playing around, my voice stammering. I told myself it was Ross, but deep down, I had my doubts. I was staring at Ross the whole time, and he never moved. At this point, an almost guilty look came across his face. He said he didn't do it, that Zoe did. My stomach churned. I didn't know whether to be angry or scared. I told Ross to get back in bed, rolled over, and tried to forget about it. But things kept getting worse. A few days later, I was finishing my homework in the kitchen when I realized I hadn't seen Ross in a while. I looked around the house and finally spotted him outside on the swing set. He was laughing, swinging higher and higher, but no one was pushing him. I stepped outside, calling his name. When he heard me, he stopped. He planted his feet on the ground and ran up to me smiling. I looked at him, my heart sinking into my chest. I asked him who he was talking to, but I already knew his response before he even spoke it. He said he was talking to Zoe, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I looked at the swing set, then back at Ross. I asked him where she was. Ross grinned and pointed beside me. He said she was standing right next to me. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned to look. Of course, no one was there. I told him I didn't see anyone but us. My voice was barely more than a whisper. He looked at me confused, then yelled at me that she was standing right next to me. I ran back inside and found Mom, spilling everything in a frantic rush. She tried to calm me down, but I could tell she really didn't believe me. Later that night, I overheard her talking to Ross in our bedroom. I heard her telling Ross that Zoe wasn't real. Ross was arguing back with her that she really was. And not only that, but Ross said that Zoe was in the room with them right now. Mom's patience cracked. She told Ross she had enough of his games and that it was time to go to bed. Ross's voice turned cold. What he said next to our mom still gives me shivers thinking about it to this day. He said, "Zoe doesn't like you saying that. She says she'll hurt you if you don't stop." Mom stormed out of the room, brushing past me in the hallway. She smiled at me, but her eyes were wet with unshed tears. That night, I woke up again to whispers. This time, I didn't hesitate. I peeked over the edge of the bed and saw Ross standing by the door, speaking to the dark hallway. I couldn't tell exactly what he was saying, but it sounded like Ross was pleading with someone to not do something. Then he stepped out into the hallway. He stood there for a moment, and then ran down the hall towards Mom's room. Moments later, I heard her scream. At this point, I wasn't thinking, I just acted. I bolted out of the bed and ran into her room. Mom was on the bed, clutching at her neck, her face turning blue. It was as if some invisible hands were choking her. Ross was crying. He kept repeating, "Zoe, please stop," over and over again. I jumped onto the bed and pulled Mom off, sending us both crashing to the floor. She gasped, air flooding back into her lungs. Her terrified eyes met mine as she scrambled to her feet, grabbed Ross and me, and dragged us out of the house. We piled into the car as she started the engine. I looked back at the front door. Standing there was a girl. She looked my age, except she was almost transparent, except for her face. Her face was twisted, monstrous, a nightmare I can't even describe, but will never forget. Mom floored it, and we never went back. We moved again, this time to stay with my grandparents for a while. Ross never mentioned Zoe after that night. I don't know what she was, but I'm so thankful that we left before we could find out. When I was 6, I learned what fear truly meant. My parents chalked it up to an overactive imagination, but I knew better. That night has haunted me ever since, and every flicker of shadow or creak on the floorboards reminds me of what I saw. Let me tell you the story, and you decide if my fears are unfounded. It started like any other evening. My mom gave me a bath at 6:45, just like she always did, helped me into my pajamas, and tucked me into bed. Dad came in shortly after with a storybook in hand. I didn't want to sleep. What 6-year-old does? But when Dad read, his voice had a way of pulling me into the dreams before I even realized it. And that night was no different. I drifted off while Dad's voice told tales of knights and castles. When I opened my eyes again, though, everything had changed. The room was darker than it ever should have been. My door was shut, and the uncomfortable glow of the hallway light was missing. Only my small nightlight remained, casting weak, flickering shadows around the room. I sat up, uneasy. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. Then I noticed it. My closet door. It was open. I never left my closet door open, ever. And my parents wouldn't have either. The pit of my stomach churned as I stared at the dark gap. A faint rustling noise broke the silence, coming from inside. I called out for my dad. No answer. Then I called out for my mom. Nothing but silence. I sat there for a moment, trying to decide if I should be scared or not. Then there was a thud. It wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the room, it might as well have been a gunshot. I jumped, my heart hammering in my chest. The clothes hanging in the closet swayed, as if someone had brushed past them. I yelled out for my dad, much louder than previously. Deep down, I knew it wasn't my dad in the closet, but that didn't mean I didn't want him in the room with me right now. Finally, the door creaked open and my dad appeared, looking groggy. He flipped the light on, flooding the room with warmth. He asked me what was wrong. I told him there was something in my closet. My words barely came out as I pointed towards the closet door. Dad sighed, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He walked over to the closet, opened it wide, and rummaged through the clothes. He turned to me and said there was nothing in there, and that I had just had a bad dream. Was I actually just dreaming? Or maybe my imagination was just running wild? Relief started to seep in as he stepped back, closing the closet door firmly. He tucked me in again, leaving the door ajar and the hallway light on this time. He told me again everything was okay and just to go back to sleep. He told me he loved me. I remembered I loved him too, even though unease still coiled at my stomach. I lay there, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But then I heard it, the soft creak of hinges. I turned to look, and I could hear my heart beating in my chest. The closet door was open again. I froze, staring at the darkness beyond the doorway. My breath came shallow and quick. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the bedroom door. It was slowly swinging shut, the hallway light fading with it. I bolted upright, ready to run into my parents' room. I hopped off my bed, my bare feet hitting the cold wood floor. However, before I could make a run for it, something cold wrapped around my ankle. I looked down at my feet. A long, blackened hand, slimy and skeletal, was gripping my leg. My gaze followed the arm back to its source, a grotesque face peeking out from under the bed. Its eyes glowed a sickly orange, and its mouth twisted into a jagged grin. I screamed, thrashing, but the grip only tightened. The creature yanked hard, pulling me to the floor. I clawed at the bed frame, my nails scraping the wood as I was dragged beneath. The creature's other hand shot out, grabbing my shoulder. With one final, powerful tug, it pulled me under. Darkness consumed me, the air growing thick and heavy. I couldn't scream anymore. I couldn't even breathe. Then, suddenly, light flooded my vision. The weight on my body vanished as the bed was lifted away. My parents were there, their faces pale and panicked. My mom scooped me up, the tears streaming down her face matching mine. I choked out. A monster pulled me under the bed. My mom tried to comfort me, telling me it was just a bad dream. I saw my dad looking around the room, trying to find anything, but there was nothing to be found. He said there was nothing in here, and that I was alone. But I wasn't. I know I wasn't. From that night on, I was never the same. The dark terrified me. I refused to sleep alone for years, and when I finally did, I left every light in the house on. No one believed me, not even my parents, but I know what I saw. I know what grabbed me, and sometimes, late at night, I still feel the ghostly grip of cold, slimy fingers around my ankle. When I was 7, my parents had a work event that kept them out late. Our usual babysitter couldn't make it, so I ended up spending the night at my aunt's house. I knew Aunt Lila well enough. She was kind and always had hidden candy in her purse, but I had never been to her house before. That night started innocently enough. Aunt Lila ordered pizza and we watched a movie. She tried her best to make it fun, but all I wanted to do was go home. Eventually, it got late, and Aunt Lila took me to the spare bedroom. The room was plain, a bed, a dresser, and nothing else. She tucked me in, promised to leave the hallway light on, and kissed my forehead, telling me goodnight. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tossing and turning. The mattress was uncomfortable, and I couldn't shake the weird feeling of being in a new place. Eventually, though, sleep came, and so did the dream. In the dream, I woke up in a massive, unfamiliar house. It was old, creaky wooden floors, peeling wallpaper, dim lighting. The kind of place that felt alive in its silence. I called out for my parents, my voice echoing back to me, but no one answered. I wandered through room after room, every door leading to another hallway or staircase. The house seemed endless, a labyrinth designed to trap me. Panic started to set in when I saw her, the old lady. She stood at the end of the hallway watching me. Her face was deeply wrinkled, and her gray hair tied back into a loose bun. But what caught my attention was the necklace she wore. A large purple gem surrounded by what looked to be a star. It seemed to glow faintly in the light. At first, she just watched me. Then she began to follow. I tried to ignore her, pretending she wasn't there. But every time I glanced back, she was closer. She never said a word, but her smile grew wider with each step. There was something unholy about that grin, like she enjoyed my fear. When she was only a few feet away, I turned and ran. Her footsteps echoed behind me as she gave chase, her silence more terrifying than any scream. I sprinted through the endless halls, my chest tightening with fear. Then she caught me. Her bony fingers grabbed at the back of my shirt, yanking me towards her. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her smile widened, her necklace glowing brighter, and I woke up. I was drenched in sweat, my body frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream for help. It felt like I was still trapped in that dream. Minutes passed before I finally regained control of my body. I ran to Aunt Lila's room, sobbing hysterically. She let me sleep in her bed for the rest of the night. The nightmare should have ended there, but it didn't. The old lady came back, again and again. Not every night, but often enough to haunt me. Each time, the dream was the same. The endless house, her silent pursuit, the glowing necklace. It got to the point where I knew I was dreaming as soon as it started, but it didn't matter. She always caught me. One night, when I was about 10, I woke up from a dream with a sharp pain on my back. I went to the bathroom, lifting up my shirt to look in the mirror. There, on my skin, was a red handprint, like someone had pressed their palm into me with searing heat. By morning, it was gone. The dream stopped about the time I started going to college. I thought I was finally free. Years passed. I got married, had a child, and moved on with my life. I never talked about the lady, not to my husband or anyone. It felt like a bad memory best left buried. But then she came back. It happened a few months ago. My daughter Sophie woke me up with a scream that froze my blood. I ran to her room, flipping on the light. She was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. I asked her what was wrong, sitting down next to her, trying to comfort her. She told me that she had a bad dream. I stroked her hair, trying to calm her down. I told her everything was okay and that it was just a bad dream. But then she told me about it. She described waking up in a big, scary house. She said she got lost, looking for me and her dad. But she mentioned the old lady, the one with the glowing purple necklace. My heart stopped. She smiled the whole time, Sophie whispered, trembling. She didn't talk, but she chased me. And when she caught me, I woke up. Tears blurred my vision as I hugged her tight. I didn't know what to say. The old lady wasn't just in my head. She was real. And now, she was haunting my daughter. I've spent every night since then sleeping in Sophie's room, praying the dreams won't come back. But deep down, I know they will.